Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This week's Wargaming terrain tutorial, we're going to look at making some simple dumpsters. We'll show you how to make hinges for these if you want them to be usable containers on your tabletop. I'll also go through at the end of the video how to make simple garbage bags and also the street sign. You can see there it's very easy to do. Those ones only take a couple of minutes, so it's just a bit of bonus content towards the end of the video for you. If you enjoy the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It does help me to keep the supplies up for making these videos. It keeps the videos coming regularly as well. Thank you to those guys that are already signed up to my Patreon. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoy the video, remember to hit like and subscribe. Let's get started. Alright, so today's build we're going to be using mostly this chipboard here, or 1mm thick cardboard. It seemed perfect for the process. I'll put the measurements up here so you can pause this and write them down if you want to. Nothing here will be too strict though. You can certainly swap out any of these materials or even the measurements to change the scale of this or the size or dimensions. Not a lot of science went into making this today. I just sort of went with what looked right. So yeah, even these angles here, I just eyeballed what would look okay in the finished product. So feel free to just take this and run with it however you like. Like I said, don't worry too much about your materials. I've just, as you can see here, I've just sort of lined things up to see what would look okay in the finished product. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the dimensions or looking up reference photos for this. What I did need to do though, the base for this one, if you're going to insert the base into the dumpster like I did, and I'll show a picture of that very shortly, you will need to take into account the thickness of this cardboard when you cut that base piece out. So as you can see there, the inner dimensions for that base is slightly different than the sides. So keep that in mind as you're building it. Now I've just laid this out to make sure that everything's going to sit together. Obviously the front panel is going to be shorter than the back panel to line up with those sides that we cut. So long as you're sort of cutting as you go and doing it in the right order, you should have no real troubles with this when it comes to putting it together. Now to make this a bit easier to sort of get everything lined up and stuck together, I'm going to be using this craft tape. It's a sort of a high-tack masking tape. It's a paper, it doesn't have a texture on it, so it works out really well. And all I'm going to do is line up all my side panels onto this piece of tape and stick them down. Now I'm not going to be removing that tape at all, I'm going to be leaving it on there for the finished product, so no need to worry too much about how sticky this stuff is. It seemed to take paint alright with a bit of a prime coat, so I had no real issues using this, and it just made the construction process a lot easier. Now you want to make sure that you do put glue in all the right places when it comes to this, so remembering that you're going to insert the base here and that you do have all those side panels going together once we sort of fold this up into the box that it's going to be. Now you can see here that I'm making sure that I have the side panels on the outside of the front and rear panel. That does change the width of the dumpster a little bit, and I'm inserting the base as I go here. So this is where I needed to make sure that base was not quite as wide as the side panels, just so that I can place everything inside here. I know this sounds a little bit confusing, but hopefully you're keeping up with me. Now, as for sticking the tape on, I just made sure that I could wrap this all the way around without too many overlaps. I didn't find that there was any real problems with where this tape was sort of cut off at the end. It sort of blends in really nicely. If you can line up the extra bits of tape to the corners, you'll find that's a lot easier. Now what I did was just put some PVA glue onto the inner joints there, just to give them a little bit of extra strength, hopefully keep the square 90 degrees for all of those, and I've just run a craft knife around the top of that excess tape and removed it. Now when it came to the lids for this one, again I've just eyeballed it. I know I want a bit of overhang on the sides and a little bit of overhang on the front. You want it to be square on the back though with that back panel. And what we're going to do is just add on some simple strips of cereal box cardboard for the lid. You don't need to do this process by any means. I just went for a kind of a molded plastic sort of look for these lids, as you do see on some dumpsters out there in the real world. And I found the best way to achieve this look was gluing down some roughly 1mm strips of cereal box cardboard onto the top into parallel rows. And then finally I went over it with some more of that craft tape, and I'll show you that process in just a moment. Now for this part, this is the handles on the side of the dumpster. I've just used balsa wood glued into a bit of a U shape, with a little bit of extra super glue down the guts of it, just to try and keep it strong and steady once I glue it onto the dumpster. Gluing it onto the dumpster was really simple, just a little bit of super glue onto the side. You just got to make sure that you got these ones lined up on both sides, so just keep an eye on it when you're gluing the second one on to make sure it is the same height as the first one. Now I'm going to finish off these lids here. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to coat these with some of that craft tape. So this paper tape is going to go over the top and the back. So I have put, because this one will have hinged lids, I want that molded plastic look to come through on the top and the bottom of the lid. So what I'm going to do here is just cover it with some of this paper tape, and then just using my fingernail or a pen or something, you can just push these lines down, so where the tape is in between those bits of cereal box cardboard, you can just press it in and it will give a nice impression, and it does kind of give it that look of molded plastic for our lid. So we're going to do the back first, so the inside of the lid, and then I'm going to go back over and do the top of the lid. The reason I did it this way was just so that the folds or the excess tape that I have will actually fold onto the inside of the dumpster, so the inside of the lid, rather than have little pieces of tape taped down onto the top. So across the top of the lid it looks all uniform and one piece. There are a couple of joins that will for the tape that you'll see on the inside of the lid, but that won't be visible very often, so it didn't end up being any issue at all. So exact same process here. I just folded this all over to the inside of the lid, pressed it all down, and then just using my nail I just ran through those ridges to give it that more molded kind of look. I thought this turned out really well. They looked a lot better than I expected they would, and certainly a lot better than just having the cereal box cardboard on there, but I guess it just depends on the level of detail that you're going for with these. So the next thing I did was just to run a little bit of tape around some of these edges. I didn't want this cardboard to be sort of fraying or sort of coming apart at any stage down the track. I want these to last a little while, so I just sealed up those exposed bits of cardboard around the top of the dumpster here just with a little bit of tape. So what I did there was just to go all the way around, so the sides as well. Now you will obviously have tape marks coming up along the sides. It's not a big issue though. Once it's painted you can hardly tell. Now because I'm hinging this one, what I'm actually going to do here is add a little bit of extra reinforcement to this back corner of the side panel. Now the reason for this is that I'm going to be running a toothpick through here to help the hinge, and what I found in my first test piece was that running that toothpick through could actually break through the top of the cardboard wall. So by adding a little bit of extra tape here and sealing the top of this one a little bit stronger with a couple extra layers of tape, just meant when I press through the toothpick it's less likely to break through the top of the side panel, and then therefore basically wreck the idea of having hinges on this one. Hinges are entirely optional for this. You don't need to do it. You can just glue your lids straight on there and paint this thing up and it will look perfect. The green one you'll see in the finished product looks fine. It doesn't have opening lids, so you don't really need it at the end of the day. What I'm using here is a little bit of a lollipop stick, and I'm going to just drill a couple of little holes here for the toothpick to go through. So I'm just lining up that lollipop stick so that it's right at the very upper edge of the back panel on the dumpster. This is just to make sure that it's not too exposed and that it will sit in there properly and that the actual lids will lift up and down. So once you drill a little bit of a hole there, you can then start to work on pushing through your toothpick. You want this to be a fairly tight fit when it goes in here. You can see I'm using my thumb at the top of the side panel to just press that down to make sure that toothpick doesn't break through the cardboard, because it is very close to the edge of this hole, so you want to be very careful about pushing this toothpick through and making sure that you don't end up breaking through the side panel at the top. But once you kind of get the toothpick worked in there, you can push it right through just to make sure that it is lined up on both sides and there is room for that lollipop stick to sit on the outside of the toothpick. So here you can see I'm threading the toothpick now through this lollipop stick, which I've cut in half, so one piece for each lid. This just keeps the lids independent so they'll each open and close on their own. And you want this to be a fairly tight fit with these lollipop sticks, so you don't want them to be too loose in there. You want them to be fairly pressed so that when you do try to turn them, that it does take a little bit of force. That just means that you can have your lid half open or fully open without it sort of, being really loose and moving around or dropping down. Once you've got that in place, there was no need to glue any of this. I just trimmed off this toothpick, and no, I never found these pieces. They shot off to the other side of the room fairly quickly, so be careful cutting those off, snips. Now, when I come to put the lids on here, like I said, each one will have its own independent hinge, but the problem you have here is that because of where that back panel is in relation to the lollipop sticks that we've put on, if you were to glue it straight on here, you're actually not going to get any range of motion for the lids. They're actually going to be impeded by the panels on the back of the dumpster. So what I'm going to do is use a couple of little pieces of sprue here. Now these are little angled pieces, so I mean, if you've got any sort of GW sprues or anything like that laying around, you'll know what this kind of looks like. I'm going to glue the two smaller sides together, and I'll show you in just a moment what that looks like. So just a bit of plastic glue on this worked fine, and you can sort of see there, sorry it's a very poor picture there, but what that's going to do is kind of form around the round lollipop stick when I glue it on. So just using some super glue here. It doesn't matter, you don't need to line this up too much when you glue it onto the lollipop stick hinge. It will just simply press in there wherever you need, and if your hinge is working at this point, once that glue's dry, you'll be able to move it up and down where you need to. So glue these two pieces in place. You might find there's another better way to do this. Look, I'll be honest with you, this is my first go at making this type of a hinge, so if you've got a better idea for how to complete this process, please let me know in the comments below. At this point, it's still not high enough, so even though I've got that sprue put in place there, we haven't really raised up the level of the hinge for the lid to give us that range of motion we need to open and close it. So I'm just using a tiny piece of balsa wood. You could certainly probably use some of that cardboard we used for the rest of the construction here. I just had some scrap balsa wood here, it's just 1 mil thick, but it was just enough. So just giving it this little bit of extra rise. It does make the lid not look like it's closed properly, which I will show you a little bit later, but it gives us just enough lift for the back of the lid to be able to open and close. So again, just super gluing this in place, making sure that it's lined up. So you want to dry fit this before you hit your glue, just to make sure you've got a sense of how much overhang you need on the side and the front for each lid to make sure that they're going to line up and be center on there once they're put in place. So with these on now with the super glue, it doesn't take very long to dry at all. Like I said, you've only got a really short amount of time once that glue's on to move these around, so make sure you know what you're doing when you get there. So as you can see, the back of that dumpster now has got a bit of a gap, but once it's painted up, there's no you can't really notice it, and it looks fine. So you can see these hinges now are working fine. Had no real issues with those. I'm really happy with it. Now I won't cover the painting in this one today. If you want to check out how I painted these, the best idea would be to check out my shipping container video where I added posters and painted those up and gave it some weathering. That'll cover exactly what I went through for the process of painting these dumpsters up today. We're going to quickly crack onto these garbage bags. Now for this I'm just using a normal garbage bag, just a single layer of the plastic. I did try this with a single pebble in there. I found it was a little bit hard to sort of use and make sure it was going to stand up the way I wanted, so I found little pebbles worked better. I'm using aquarium pebbles here. Just place a few inside the little square, as you can see, and a little bit of cotton, a double knot on there to tie it up, and then just using your scissors, you'll just trim off that excess plastic at the top, and this should hold together pretty well. One thing I will do though in just a moment is to add some super glue to the cotton knot that I've placed. So that'll just make sure that as you move these around and you play with them, they shouldn't come apart too easily. So I did have some issues with that cotton coming off. There might be a better material to use, but as you can see here, I'm just going to put a small drop of super glue on the top where these knots are on all of these bags. It turns out you can't see them in the end anyway, so you know, it's no problem having a little drop of super glue on there. It worked out really well. And as you can see here, I've got a stack of garbage bags which I can put around or inside my bin when I'm done. And for the final thing we're going to do today is make up that little street sign that's been ripped out of the ground and placed with the garbage. For the sign part of this, I'm just actually using a piece of this little steel from the tea light candle you can see there. I found this stuff is really good. It's easy to mold and sort of, you know, if you want the sign to be bent, it's really easy to cut with scissors. The only thing you want to do is you want to give that a little bit of a sand before you try to glue the post onto this one. So make sure you just sort of rough up the surface before you use the super glue on that tea light candle steel for the sign. For the wire, I've found this Crafter's wire, silver wire, 20 gauge. I found it at the craft shops, a couple of dollars. It's really easy to bend this stuff, really easy to work with, so it doesn't hurt your fingers playing around with that stuff. Now I wanted this to dry pretty quickly, so I've hit it just with a little bit of bicarb, just to try and speed up the glue drying process. And for the concrete bit that's been ripped out of the ground at the bottom, I'm just using a little bit of this cork board. Again, found this at the craft store in a roll. It's only about 1 mil thick, this cork, but it's really good for basing, really good for this type of thing when you need a bit of a concrete or a stone look. I've just ripped up a few small pieces there, and I'm just going to press the wire straight into it and then feed on 4 or 5 of these to give that impression of a sort of a concrete, you know, base that's been ripped out of the ground. I thought this worked really well. Few of these put together, it looks like, you know, that dirty, messy kind of concrete post that you would see ripped out of the ground. To hold it all together, I just hit it with some watered down Mod Podge and black paint. This worked fine, it absorbs that glue really well. Found some simple signs on Google, printed them out for roughly the right size. And again, because the sign itself, the steel part, is quite thin, it's easy to trim this up if you need to, if it doesn't work out well. And there you can see our sign. I'll hit all of these with a bit of paint and weather them up a little bit, and as you can see in these pictures, these turned out really well. So if you're wanting to fill up your garbage, your dumpster with bags, I find the best way is to use a little piece of foam or foam board or something to sort of place into the base of the dumpster so that you don't have to use, you know, 50 garbage bags to get it overflowing, and it will give a cool look like you can see there. This was a really fun build. I was really surprised. I tried out a few new things, and hopefully you guys learned a little bit from this one as well. I know I certainly did. It was a lot of fun, and I really like the look of these on the table. It's been a lot of fun this week, so thank you very much for joining me again. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember, like, subscribe, share this one, and I will see you next week with another build. Thanks everyone.